Objection!
Godot. A character that I have been both obsessed and fascinated with ever since I first completed Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney Trials and Tribulations in late 2019. A character that cemented Trials and Tribulations as one of my favorite video games of all time. A character whose story left a greater impact on me than any character that came before or after him. A character that I continuously find myself coming back to no matter how many other games I play, and a character that has been on the receiving end of my praise here on this channel ever since I started making Ace Attorney content. In many ways, I have Godot to thank for this channel's existence. Had he not left the impact on me that he did all those years ago, there's no telling if I would have fallen in love with the Ace Attorney series as much as I did. While I adore the first two games in the original trilogy, Trials and Tribulations always felt different to me. And to that extent, Godot had always felt different than any other fictional character I'd ever seen before. I like plenty of characters across multiple game series, but Godot always stood out as something real special. And it was because of him that I shifted focus away from Smash Bros. On this channel and moved towards Ace Attorney, which was a decision that gave it new life that I could have never expected. Yet, despite all of that, I've never actually been able to properly articulate why exactly I like him so much, and that's because my reasons are far from cut and dry. Whenever I try to describe why he's so special to me, I find myself left speechless on what to even say. It's not as simple as just liking his character design or liking his theme, though both of those aspects are amazing. It's more than that, a lot more. Godot is a complex character with so many moving parts to him that it can be hard to pinpoint what exactly makes him tick. And that's because it's not just about those moving parts in isolation. It's about how those parts complement one another and come together to make a greater whole. If you ask me, that is the mark of a complex character. It's when you can't just explain what makes them great in a couple of minutes. You need to be able to dive deep into everything about them and carefully dissect why they're so great. And today, I've decided to finally do exactly that. I'm going to go case by case analyzing everything from both the game and anime adaptations of Trials and Tribulations from top to bottom, so that I can finally tell you why it is my firm belief that Godot is the best written Ace Attorney character of all time. This is by far the biggest video I've ever made, so if you're ready to go on this journey with me, grab your favorite cup of coffee, get comfortable, and let's dive right in. So, we're not actually going to be beginning this comprehensive analysis at the first case of the game, as Godot isn't physically present in that case, though it will come into play later, so just put it in the back of your mind and let's move on to the actual starting place for this video, the Stolen Turnabout. When players first learn of Godot, he's introduced to them in the same way that most prosecutors are typically introduced in the Ace Attorney series, through another character hyping them up in order to get the player quaking in their boots for the upcoming trial. In this case, players learn of him through none other than Luke Atme, who tells Phoenix and crew that Godot's equal cannot be found in this country, but in heaven. Now, this is a pretty bold thing to say. And when you combine the fact that players have already done this song and dance twice before with the fact that this guy doesn't look all too trustworthy, it's pretty hard to believe that this is anything more than a hollow bluff. However, he then goes on to tell them that Miles Edgeworth himself acknowledged him as the best prosecutor in the country, which, for the time at least, really shows the player that this guy means business. At this point in the series, Edgeworth is someone that Phoenix and crew have really grown to trust and respect, so if he is calling this Godot the best, then there's no telling what they're going up against. Now, it is important to note that this statement was later proven to be false via confirmation from Edgeworth himself. But at this point in the game, there's no way of knowing whether these are the bluffs of an arrogant detective or the genuine truth. And this confusion is something that's carried over when Phoenix finally meets Godot face to face, or face to mask. Before he even says a word, Godot immediately raises a lot of questions. The most obvious of which being, why does he look like Cyclops from the X-Men? It's important to note that with a few key exceptions, Ace Attorney does try its best to stay relatively grounded in reality at all times. Furthermore, Ace Attorney doesn't typically make choices like giving this mysterious new prosecutor a weird cybernetic-looking mask for no reason. So it's immediately obvious to the player that there's something going on with this guy. Something that they have no way of knowing at this point, but something that's intriguing nonetheless. Now, in just his first couple of exchanges with other characters, Godot is able to establish the 4 key elements of himself that help to really define the type of character that he is. His initial conversation with the judge helps to establish the first.
What about the prosecution? Are you prepared to...
What a stupid question.
What did you say?
Fine. Let me ask you then, Your Honor. Are you ready? Are you ready to pass judgment?
What? No, I'm not. I will pass judgment after I hear arguments from both sides.
Well, if you're not ready yourself, you shouldn't expect others to be. That's a rule to live by.
The way he speaks to the judge feels equally as wise and smart as it does sarcastic and arrogant. He frequently drops these incredibly quotable lines designed to boost his own ego at the direct expense of others. He's asserting his own superiority over others, as prosecutors in the Ace Attorney series tend to do, but not in the same way as Francisca whipping anyone who disagrees with her, for example. He never necessarily forces his authority onto others because he already fully believes that everyone is lesser than him, and he treats them as such. This attitude is perfectly highlighted in Godot's main theme, Fragrance of Dark Coffee. Unlike most prosecutor themes, it's not trying to be grand or imposing, but low-key and chill. I find that a prosecutor's theme tends to play when the prosecutor in question catches the player at a critical point, so the theme itself usually gives them a sense of, oh crap, they caught me. Conversely, Godot's theme exists more to take the player down to his level. It's almost as if it's saying, slow down and enjoy a nice cup of coffee with me while I explain why you're an idiot. Speaking of coffee, I would argue that Godot never drinking more than 17 cups of coffee every trial is another clear sign of his arrogance. No, seriously, hear me out on this. While it is a very ridiculous and hilarious fact at first glance, like seriously 17 cups of coffee a trial would probably kill you, maybe that's why he's wearing a mask, it's because his eyes are probably permanently bloodshot, think about what he's actually saying here. He's basically saying, this trial goes on as long as I say it does. Them's the rules and nobody can say otherwise. He treats it like such an uncontestable absolute that can only spawn from pure, unbridled arrogance. Now, this is the trait of, for lack of a better term, a jerk. Godot is full of himself, condescending, and just plain rude. He clearly sees everyone around him as lesser than him and is constantly lecturing them on why they are lesser. However, while he does come off as overconfident, his confidence doesn't feel misplaced. He clearly knows what he's doing and has no trouble taking control of any given situation. He's a jerk, but he's also a real threat. To briefly skip ahead, we're talking about the guy who managed to get Furio Tigre, a dangerous loan shark with connections to mob bosses, on the stand in a mere 30 minutes and put him in his place when no one else could. That is very impressive, and a testament to how this Godot doesn't mess around. So to review, the first 2 elements of Godot are arrogance and skill. And just to be clear, neither of these first 2 elements are particularly unique. These are elements that you could argue are present in every prosecutor in the series, because they're good traits to have for characters that the player is going to be directly combating. By creating a prosecutor who thinks they're unstoppable, players can take immense satisfaction from knocking them down a peg. So up until this point, Godot is checking all the boxes of a stereotypical prosecutor. He's arrogant and full of himself, but he seems to have the skills to back it up. That's great and all, but what exactly sets him apart from the rest? Well, the way he introduces himself answers that question by raising a few new ones.
I am Godot, legendary prosecutor. I've never lost a case.
Yes, your reputation precedes you. What kind of cases have you dealt with so far?
None.
What did you say?
I've never prosecuted a case before.
Never? But you said you've never lost before.
Exactly. I've never lost. I've never won before either.
Quite arrogant for a beginner, aren't you?
Even the mightiest of redwoods begin their lives as mere saplings.
This exchange is weird, to say the least. Funny, to be sure, but also perplexing, which was done very intentionally. It was designed to throw the player for a loop and make them wonder, what exactly is going on with this guy? Combine this exchange with Godot's strange appearance that I discussed earlier, and you have core element number 3, mystery. What makes Godot so intriguing in the first 2 cases he's in is that it's really hard to get a read on him. What do you mean he's never prosecuted a case before? What do you mean we don't know his age? What exactly does this guy want? This brings us to the final and most important exchange before the trial truly begins.
So we finally meet, Mr. Phoenix Wright. I've returned from the depths of hell to do battle with you.
The final core element of this mysterious man is that he has a personal vendetta against Phoenix Wright. So much so that he refers to him as Phoenix Wright, purposefully misspelling his name as a sign of disrespect. In the anime, he even refers to him as a variety of incorrect names, such as Mr. Slight, Mr. Plight, Mr. Smite, Mr. Prite, and Mr. Blight. This guy has it out for Phoenix, and he makes no effort to conceal that fact, while Phoenix has no idea why. All 4 of these elements combine to make a prosecutor that functions as an adversary just as those who came before him, while also being one who has an aura of mystery and malice surrounding him that's just begging to be explored. And for the remainder of the Stolen Turnabout and the entirety of Recipe for Turnabout, this mystery doesn't get explored much at all. Godot continues to act as a formidable opponent, tossing out insults at Phoenix and manipulating multiple situations in his favor, but little is done to answer the big overarching questions surrounding him. However, there are a few important tidbits to note, such as when Mia is channeled at the end of the Stolen Turnabout to save the case, causing Godot to freeze up. He's left speechless upon seeing her and actually agrees with her request for further testimony, which ends up winning Phoenix the case. This moment is one that the player likely won't find odd during their initial playthrough due to the intensity of the situation, but it's quite noteworthy during a second playthrough. This is the first time in the entire case where Godot agrees to cooperate. But why? Well, all will be revealed in due time. There's also the fact that Godot was unable to see the ketchup stain on Maggie Bird's apron when he presented it in Recipe for Turnabout, which everyone ended up mistaking for blood, confusing him. Unlike other moments of foreshadowing throughout this game, this one actually does stand out as noticeably odd during a first playthrough, and sure enough, it will be relevant later. But other than that, players are left to play through both cases wondering what could possibly be going on with this mysterious man. But all that changes with Turnabout beginning. But before we get into Turnabout Beginnings, we need to take a step back to the first case in this game, Turnabout Memories. As I said before, this case does not physically feature Godot, but it is important to provide some key details from that case before jumping into Turnabout Beginnings. So let's do just that. When the case begins, players find themselves taking control of Mia Fey, Phoenix Wright's former mentor who was tragically murdered early into the first game, though she continued to mentor Phoenix after that thanks to spirit channeling. The case takes place 2 years before Phoenix Wright's courtroom debut and actually features him as the defendant, making this the story of how Phoenix first met Mia. What's even more interesting than that, though, is how the game immediately makes it clear that this is not Mia's first trial. Her courtroom debut actually took place a year prior, but the trial traumatized her so badly that she thought she would never set foot in another courtroom. But according to Marvin Grosberg, Mia's mentor, she forcefully insisted on taking this case in particular. This, along with several other lines of dialogue, make it immediately clear that Mia has taken this case not only for her client, but for a very personal reason. And as the trial begins, that reason is quickly brought to light. From the very beginning, Mia was nervous about this trial, which is perfectly normal considering the fact that it's her second trial ever. But what's not normal is how she frequently tenses up at the name of one key individual, going as far as to strangle Grosberg out of rage at the mere mention of her name. That key individual is Dahlia Hawthorne, Phoenix Wright's girlfriend and the victim's ex in this case, but so much more to Mia. Now, Dahlia is introduced as a character who tries to look innocent in order to manipulate those around her, a trait that has been seen in several characters throughout the franchise. But what sets Dahlia apart is that she's much more sinister than the rest. So much so that the player is almost able to immediately sense that something is going on with her before she even utters a word. From Mia's immediate negative response to her presence to her slightly unnerving theme, it's no secret that this witness is not the delicate flower that she claims to be. When it comes time for Dahlia to take the stand, Mia welcomes it with open arms, showing that this is what she's been waiting for all this time. And sure enough, Dahlia greets Mia by saying that she hasn't changed a bit, definitively showing that this is not their first meeting. Mia then confirms that they have met each other before, and then the trial continues as she attempts to unmask Dahlia as the true killer of this case. During a 20-minute recess, Mia asks Phoenix how he came to meet Dahlia Hawthorne. He proceeds to tell her that he bumped into Dahlia in the very courthouse they are in right now, where she then gave him a pendant with a small bottle as a symbol of their love. It's upon seeing this pendant that everything starts to click into place for Mia, as she is very familiar with an incident that took place on the same day at the same place. An incident where, as Grosberg says, she came to lose her boyfriend. The police report of the incident tells the player that the name of this victim was Diego Armando, and that he was interviewing Dahlia regarding another case before his coffee cup was poisoned. Dahlia naturally became the suspect, but was able to get away with the crime by concealing the poison in the very bottle that she gave to Phoenix shortly after the crime, making it unclear to the police how exactly Diego was poisoned and clearing her of all suspicion. Unfortunately for Dahlia, Mia was not going to let her get away this time, as she was not only able to prove how she concealed the poison on that day, but was also able to prove how she was the murderer in the very case Phoenix Wright stood accused in. This causes Dahlia to reveal her true self for a brief moment, flying into a rage and burning away at the butterflies surrounding her, before coming to her senses and assuring Mia that they will meet again. What amazes me about Turnabout Memories is how much of this stuff I just went over flies completely over the player's head during their first playthrough, simply because it's the first case. The first cases in the last two games were not much more than tutorial cases with little depth, so someone jumping into the third game after playing those two is not going to expect the immense amount of detail and foreshadowing that is here. All of it is presented in plain sight for the player to see, and it's all incredibly meaningful, yet none of it clicks until two cases pass and it's finally time to experience Mia's first trial. Turnabout Beginnings. And as the case, begins, there are two names in particular that catch the player's attention and make them realize the bigger picture that's going on here. The first is the name of the victim in this case, that being Valerie Hawthorne, which is incredibly concerning given what the player knows about that last name, and leaving a very dark hint towards things to come. The second, and debatably more important name, belongs to a man that bears a striking resemblance to Godot. It's then that his name is revealed to be Diego Armando. And it's at this exact point that, if the player was paying close attention up until this point, everything from Turnabout Memories begins to fall into place. Diego Armando, otherwise known as Mia's boyfriend, Dahlia's poison victim in the courthouse cafeteria, and the true identity of Godot. Suddenly, Mia's eagerness to take Phoenix's case and her animosity towards Dahlia makes so much more sense. Mia had a personal connection to Dahlia not only because of the events of this case, but because Dahlia was responsible for poisoning her boyfriend. Additionally, Godot has a connection with Phoenix Wright because he was in a romantic relationship with his mentor before he was poisoned. The only questions remaining now are, how did he survive the poisoning, and what does he want now? Only time will tell, but for now, let's return to the case at hand. At this point, the stage is set for a traumatic case to say the least. And while the characters are none the wiser of this fact, it's hard not to feel a sense of dread while playing. Just knowing that no matter how good things may end up looking, there is no way that this can ultimately end well. Before things get intense, though, Diego and Mia's relationship is fleshed out a little bit, allowing the player to learn a little bit more about this man that they still, quite frankly, don't know a whole lot about. Unsurprisingly, Diego's personality isn't very different from how it is in the present, but there are a few key differences that are very important. He's still just as arrogant and sarcastic as he usually is, but he presents his sarcasm to Mia in a much more comforting and reassuring way than he does to everyone else that the player has seen up until this point. Rather than directly insult her, he opts to playfully poke fun at her while trying to encourage her and push her in the right direction. This is perfectly exemplified by the fact that he refers to Mia as Kitten. This simple name displays the two main aspects of how Diego feels in this relationship. One, that he definitely sees himself as Mia's superior, and two, that he cares deeply for Mia and wants to protect her. Because at the end of the day, what is a kitten but a delicate, frail little creature that needs tender love and care? This nickname is slightly demeaning, but it's also a sign of affection. In contrast, Mia still refers to Diego as Mr. Armando, showing how she holds a great deal of respect and adoration for him. This dynamic is on full display in Diego's very first interaction with Mia.
You're not going to figure out the truth by just staring at the guy. I came to see how our little kitten was doing all alone in the big scary lion's den. I thought maybe you'd like someone to play with. Aren't I good enough? After all, it's me, Diego Armando. No. You got it all wrong. Today you're the finest.
This exchange shows how even though Diego is acknowledging that Mia is still a beginner, or a kitten, he's also saying that today, she is in the spotlight. It's her time to shine, and he quite frankly wouldn't miss that for the world. This attitude can be seen throughout the entire case, with Diego using sarcastic comments to snap Mia into place before guiding her in the right direction. He talks her down sometimes, but he truly wants the best for her and does everything in his power to allow her to thrive in the courtroom. What I love about this relationship is that Diego doesn't act even remotely like this towards anyone else in the entire game. I mean, in the very same exchange where he hypes Mia up, he's also insulting his own boss. This is a man who is incredibly arrogant and pessimistic about everything around him, but whatever he sees in Mia is clearly special to him. Her optimism and strong belief in her clients perfectly complements his personality, making them a perfect pair. In the courtroom, players get to see exactly where Mia got her never-give-up attitude that she would go on to pass down to Phoenix. It all started with Diego. He is never willing to back down, encouraging Mia to save her tears for the end and hold a smile until then. He's a firm believer in standing strong and not backing down until the very end. It's a very optimistic mindset while also being a slightly arrogant one, because Diego is going in with the predetermined idea that he and Mia are going to succeed. Not only because he believes in Mia, but because much like in the present, he's going in with the mindset of what he says goes. So if he says they're going to win, then they're going to win. This can be uplifting and inspirational, but it can also be incredibly destructive depending on how you look at it. While Diego's confidence may or may not stem from a place of arrogance, Mia's confidence stems not from her own capabilities, but from her undying faith in her client. Unlike Diego, she doesn't fully trust her own skills, but she truly believes that her client is innocent and is willing to fight for them until the very end. This is why I believe Diego and Mia complement each other so well. They both uplift each other in their own ways, and they complement each other's weaknesses in the process. Mia gives Diego someone to believe in with his heart rather than his mind, and Diego is there to guide Mia down the right path and support her until the very end. Unfortunately, it's hard to notice these nuances during a first playthrough given the gravity of the case at hand. The defendant in this case is Terry Falls, an escaped death row inmate who was sentenced 5 years ago for charges of kidnapping, extortion, and murder. As it turns out, Terry had staged a kidnapping on Dusky Bridge together with Valerie Hawthorne and his girlfriend at the time in order to receive a $2 million diamond as ransom. However, Valerie went against the plan, causing Falls' girlfriend to jump off the bridge and into Eagle River, where she presumably met her fate. Valerie then proceeded to testify against Falls in court, which ultimately sealed his fate. 5 years later, Falls stands charged of murdering Valerie on the very same bridge after escaping from prison. And as I'm sure you can guess, it's not long before Dahlia Hawthorne herself takes the stand. Only this time under the guise of Melissa Foster, hiding her name in order to conceal her identity to the court. She plays her usual game, but it's not long before Mia and Diego are able to expose her, revealing her true identity and deducing that she was Terry Falls' girlfriend who came up with the kidnapping plot in order to secure the $2 million diamond, fake her own death, and frame Falls for it all. And sure enough, she was also the murderer of her sister Valerie, as she aimed to silence her permanently, just as she would go on to do with several others in the future. But, seeing as Turnabout Memories exists, the player knows all too well that Dahlia will not pay for her crimes here. Because just as Mia and Diego are starting to get to the bottom of things and it's time to question Terry Falls himself, Dahlia interjects to say this.
Terry?
Dahlia?
Yes, it's been a while.
I hate to ask, but you didn't betray me, did you?
I don't need to say anything. Don't you know the answer? Careful, my life is in your hands right now.
Oh, Dahlia.
After this exchange, Falls demands a drink of water. A strange request at first glance, but Diego offers him a cup of coffee regardless. The trial continues and Falls testifies, but just as Mia is able to find contradictions in his statements, Falls begins to cough up blood, saying that he promised Dahlia that if they couldn't trust each other anymore, then he's supposed to drink from the very same bottle that would go on to poison Diego and be given to Phoenix. This promise was designed to manipulate Falls into killing himself should he ever begin to realize the monster that Dahlia truly was. Before Falls leaves this world, he gives one last thank you to the one who enabled him to ingest the poison, Diego Armando. And this tragic event marks the end of this traumatic trial. As Mia puts it, it ended with no winners, only losers. But one person, a true criminal, Dahlia Hawthorne. She left the courtroom with a secret smile on her demonically sweet face. Dahlia Hawthorne was responsible for the suffering of so many different people, but she would not be brought to justice until a year later. Meanwhile, players are left with a sinking feeling in their chest now that they are fully aware of the extent of her crimes. And though she may be behind bars now, the damage that she has done is irreversible. But before the case closes for good, players are presented with one last exchange between Mia and Diego.
Inexcusable. The truth was right there in front of our faces, but we couldn't grasp it. I guess we were just too soft.
It's not your fault, but it is mine. If I were better... I knew it. I knew I wasn't cut out for this.
Mia? I understand how you feel, but you can't cry yet. Remember this.
The only time a lawyer can cry is when it's all over.
This whole scene is so significant to Diego's character because it's one of the only times that he's genuinely shaken to his core and shown to be semi-vulnerable. This is signified by the fact that he drops the kitten nickname for the first time in the entire case and actually addresses Mia by her name. This catches her off guard because I think she realizes how even Diego can't fully hold himself together in this situation. Try as he might to keep his calm and collected personality up for her, he's really struggling to control his anger towards Dahlia. So much so that he ends up crushing his coffee cup in his hand, causing him to bleed. Yet despite it all, he still holds a smile for Mia. And that's because despite his pain, Diego still wants to be there for her. He wants to be the stronger one so that he can lift her up and motivate her to never give up. It's clear that he feels a personal responsibility to protect her, and that he plans on keeping up that responsibility no matter what happens. And this is where Godot's most iconic line originates from. The only time a lawyer can cry is when it's all over. I'll discuss why this quote is so meaningful in the grand scheme of things later in the video, but in this context, it's once again showing how despite the worst circumstances, Diego is unwilling to give up just yet. He's telling Mia not to cry because at this moment, he truly believes that they could still catch Dahlia together. He may have rage boiling in his heart, but he's still hopeful. It's not time to cry yet because it's not over yet. And Diego could not be more right in this moment, because things are far from over at this point, though I don't imagine things ended up going the way that he had planned. As the player knows, Diego would end up interviewing Dahlia regarding the case, and it would be during this interview that he would be poisoned and promptly disappear for 5 long years. It's at this point that I'd like to show a scene exclusive to the anime that plays at the end of the episode covering Turnabout Memories. Mia has successfully caught Dahlia for her crimes, and she pays a visit to the most important person in her life to tell him the news.
I finally settled the score for you, like I promised. I'll be back.
This finally takes us to the present day. Diego Armando is somehow alive and is now a prosecutor assuming the name of Godot. His hair is now white as cream, he dons a mysterious mask, and he has it out for Mia's protege, Phoenix Wright. The player knows almost everything they need to know about Godot's past at this point, but it's up to the final case to connect the dots so that everything can finally fall into place. And that case is Bridge to the Turnabout.
Shichishito, the treasured Kurain village heirloom whose name means 7-branched sword. It is said that this sacred sword represents life itself. Though the branches may appear to be infinite, the choices limitless. Like our destinies, the sword comes to but one end, one merciless point. And when the silver cord, the fragile thread that binds us to this world, is severed, the illusion is revealed, and the implacability of fate is finally laid bare.
This intro is powerful. Aside from being a description of the legendary Sword of Karain, it's one big analogy of how every event throughout the trilogy is leading up to one final climax at the end of this very case. This intro, along with the initial hour of the case, served to set the stage for a finale of grand proportion. A murder has taken place in Hazakura Temple, a Karain temple located high in the mountains that Phoenix, Maya, and Pearl all decide to visit in order for Maya to train. The victim is a mysterious woman named Elise Donim, and the suspect is a woman who looks eerily similar to Dahlia Hawthorne, though she claims to go by Iris. Phoenix ends up waking up to the murder scene, before trying to cross a burning bridge in an attempt to reach Maya in the inner temple, before plummeting down into Eagle River. But don't worry, he's fine. As any Ace Attorney fan would know, Phoenix Wright is immortal. However, this does end up putting Phoenix out of commission for the first investigation and trial, leaving Edgeworth to take his place. However, what's interesting is that just as Phoenix is absent, so too is Godot. Francisca ends up taking his place, which not only provides a great deal of development for Edgeworth and Francisca's dynamic, but also serves to lower the tension revolving around Godot for a brief time. That overarching tension no doubt lingers in the back of the player's mind, but the absence of its major players allows them to focus on the case itself and get all the facts down before it's time to return to the matter at hand in the following investigation. As it's then that players are re-given control of Phoenix so that he can bring an end to all of this himself. Early into his investigation with Francisca, Godot makes his first appearance since Recipe for Turnabout. And unsurprisingly, he greets Phoenix with just as much anger and spite as he normally does.
Prosecutor Godot, I didn't know you were here. How come you didn't show up at the trial today? I could ask you the exact same question. Huh? But I had a cold, so I had something slightly more important than a common cold to deal with. The importance of which is something you have no hope of ever understanding.
Now, that last line is incredibly mysterious to say the least. Something of importance that Phoenix has no hope of understanding? If that isn't a foreboding line, then I don't know what is. However, players aren't given long to ponder this, as Godot then proceeds to become one of the only characters in the entire series to completely and utterly shut Franziska von Karma down.
Who's the wild mares, right?
This is Miss Von Karma. She was the acting prosecutor in your absence today.
Well, I guess I owe you one then. But you can go now, Princess. It's time for the big boys to take the reins. Hey, Philly. Know your role and shut your mouth. I can't stand women like you. I'm only gonna say this once, Lady Von Whippingberg. Go home!
This exchange is jaw-dropping during a first playthrough. I mean, we're talking about Franziska von Karma here. The prosecutor who won't take no as an answer from anybody, maybe Edgeworth on a bad day. So to see Godot so effortlessly leave her speechless is incredibly impressive. At this point, the four main aspects of Godot's character that I discussed earlier are cranked up to 11. His arrogance shines through from his disrespect of a fellow prosecutor, his skills shine through in his efficiency in shutting her down, his dislike for Phoenix Wright is still in full effect, and the player is aware of his past at this point, but his intentions are still an enigma. As Phoenix notes,
There's something different about Godot today. I'm getting such a strong sense of something from behind that mask of his. Is it anger? Or is it sorrow?
this was an incredibly insightful comment from Phoenix because he manages to notice something that Godot is doing his best at this point to conceal. His sorrow. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here, so let's save that for a little bit later. Shortly after this, Godot elaborates on some things that the player has already been partially aware of, but that Phoenix has been completely unaware of. He explains that he has experienced death before, reiterating that he has returned from the depths of hell to do battle with Phoenix. This understandably perplexes Phoenix and Franziska, but players know that the death he is referring to came in the form of the poison that was placed in his coffee cup 5 years earlier. Though it's still unclear how exactly he survived that ordeal. Godot then goes on to explain that the mask he wears is a result of his near-death experience, and that he needs it to even see. When Franziska asks Godot what exactly he means when he says that he died, Godot responds by gesturing to Phoenix, telling him,
You know when my life ended, and who ended it for me.
Godot is of course referencing to the fact that Phoenix was there the day that he was poisoned by Dahlia, but Phoenix struggles to remember the details due to how unaware of the situation he was on that day. Still, it's clear that while certainly this is one of the reasons for Godot's animosity towards Phoenix, it's not the full picture. The conversation shifts to Maya Fey's condition. The only place she can be is locked up in the Sacred Cavern, which is currently locked up tight by a trick lock. Godot explains that the chances of her being alive are still slim due to the freezing temperatures in the cavern, which he uses to segue into finally explaining why he resents Phoenix Wright so much. Godot accuses Phoenix of sending Maya Fey to her death, but he doesn't stop there. He also blames him for the death of another.
Well, Trite, once again a woman dies because of you.
Once again? What are you talking about?
Don't tell me you've forgotten. It was only 2 years ago, after all, when the last unfortunate woman died because of you.
Because of me?
And you know who that was? It was Maya Fey's sister. That's right, Mia Fey.
Mia Fey. The one person linking Phoenix to Godot. Someone who served as Diego's partner, someone who proceeded to serve as Phoenix's mentor, and someone who met her untimely demise in the first game at the hands of Red White. And Godot, unable to cope with this fact, pushes blame onto Phoenix, telling him that he should have been there to protect her, and that even though he was there to catch Red White in the end, that won't bring her back. Now, this scene is fascinating to me because in the past, I often regarded it as a somber, emotional scene that acts as the turning point for Godot's character. But upon further inspection, I realized that the player has no reason to feel any sympathy for Godot at this point. Instead, it actually ends up frustrating them, because at this point, Godot's reasons feel petty, flawed, and just plain irrational. And while this realization initially caught me off guard, I quickly realized that this was the game's intention all along. The fact of the matter is that given the context of this scene, Godot is being petty and irrational, and that kind of makes the player resent him. I mean, come on. I understand that you cared about Mia a lot, but how the hell was I supposed to know that she was in danger? While it's beyond a shadow of a doubt that Godot went through a very tragic series of events, he's handling the situation in the same way he has in the past. Like a jerk. Now, it is important to note that this isn't the full story, and that was done very purposefully. It makes sense in universe because Godot doesn't feel like he owes Phoenix an explanation, and it makes sense in the grand scheme of things because it's not time for everything to be revealed. This moment doesn't tell the player everything, but it tells them enough. Enough about the type of person Godot is, and enough to keep antagonistic feelings towards him high going into the final trial. This is all further reinforced during Phoenix's second encounter with Godot at the tail end of the investigation, where Godot tells him that,
"You finally realized how terrible of a crime being painfully oblivious is."
further condemning him for being too naive to protect both Maya and Mia. This second encounter is also noteworthy for being the scene where Godot's reminiscence theme, titled The Bitter Taste of Truth, plays for the first time. I mention this because the name and tone of this theme are rich in meaning, and the contrast it has with Godot's other theme, Fragrance of Dark Coffee, is staggering. While Fragrance of Dark Coffee represents Godot's calm, better-than-you attitude, this theme perfectly encapsulates the sorrow deep within his soul. It captures the pain he feels and the resentment he holds. The name of the theme, The Bitter Taste of Truth, represents truths so horrible that they can be hard to even accept. This will all be much more significant in the near future, but in this context, it signifies Godot giving Phoenix the bitter truth of Mia and Maya's fate. For now, it is but a teaser before the final trial, which, as Godot says, will be where everything is settled once and for all, and he's not wrong. Everything throughout the entire game has been building up to this final trial, and it's where everything will finally be brought to an end. But before I can properly delve into that trial, there are a few important facts to note that we learned during the investigation, and that will be essential into following the plot of the trial. For one, the true identity of Elise Donham is actually Misty Faye, Maya's long-lost mother that mysteriously disappeared during the DL6 incident, which was thoroughly gone over in the first game. Secondly, Iris is in fact not Dahlia Hawthorne, but her twin sister who was raised in Hazakura Temple from a young age. Thirdly, both Iris and Dahlia are the secret children of Morgan Faye, the devilish aunt of Maya Faye who was incarcerated in the second game for acting as an accomplice in attempting to frame Maya for murder. Fourthly, after the verdict of Dahlia Hawthorne's trials, she was eventually sentenced to death for her crimes, and was executed just a month before the events of this case. And lastly, Iris has decided to testify in court, claiming that she has a confession to make. As the trial begins, Godot is fiercer than ever before, opening up this time with a particularly thought-provoking quote given the context of the situation.
"It is impossible to predict what the future has in store for any of us. This is precisely why people feel the need to judge the past. And we of the court have been charged with the solemn duty of passing such judgment."
While Godot still attempts to maintain his calm and collected personality, there are several points throughout this trial where he sheds that personality in favor of a more aggressive and commanding one. But just as this trial shows him at his most aggressive, it also shows him at his most vulnerable. Because the more passionate you get about something, the more open to attack you leave yourself. When he presents a stone lantern that was present at the scene of the crime, and the judge observes that the name Maya was written in blood on it upside down, Godot is the most shaken up he's been since Turnabout Beginnings. And I mean that literally, as Phoenix observes that
Godot is literally shaking, and somehow I don't think it's from caffeine overdose.
Godot's unstable demeanor in this trial really serves to raise the stakes. It shows how this is so much more to him than just another chance at defeating Phoenix in court. This trial is all or nothing. In the anime, where the characters get to be much more expressive, Godot is noticeably more uneasy during this trial in particular, which is no coincidence. Yet despite all of this, Godot is also found for the first time to be helping Phoenix? Wait, what? This goes against everything we know about the guy at this point. I mean, sure, he is acting more impulsive and irrational than normal, but that can easily be chalked up to the gravity of the situation. It doesn't justify why on earth he would assist the very person he's been attempting to take down for this entire game. There are 3 separate instances during the first half of the trial where Godot is vaguely lending Phoenix hints to help guide him in the right direction, just as he did for Mia 5 years ago. To summarize, Godot's behavior during the initial half of this trial is incredibly peculiar to say the least. Something about this trial is causing him to act on his emotions far more than ever before, yet he still gives subtle hints to Phoenix when he needs them the most, almost as if he wants him to succeed. While the player does know far more about him than they did during the Stolen Turnabout and Recipe for Turnabout, his actions here show that there is still, even now, much more to be revealed. However, these pressing questions are temporarily put on the sidelines, due to the reveal that the Iris testifying in court is in fact not Iris, but a spirit-channeled Dahlia Hawthorne. Godot is stunned, to say the least. So for the remainder of the first half of this trial, he's more of an observer than anything else, while Dahlia takes the center stage. She explains how before she was executed, she hatched a plan with Morgan Fay to kill Maya Fay. Morgan would attempt to manipulate her daughter Pearl into channeling the spirit of Dahlia on that fateful night, and Dahlia would use her body to do the deed. This would mean that Morgan Fay would be able to get what she wanted by opening up a spot for Pearl to be the master of the Quirine channeling technique, and Dahlia would finally be able to exact her revenge that she promised Mia 5 years ago. However, things didn't go quite as planned when the fateful night came. Pearl misinterpreted the instructions that Morgan gave her, opening up for an opportunity for Misty Fay to channel Dahlia instead. This, unfortunately, wasn't able to halt Dahlia altogether, as she was still able to confront Maya and attempt to kill her. It was at this point that, according to Dahlia, Maya stabbed her, causing everything to go dark and send her right back to the spirit realm. It's then that Dahlia claims that Maya threw herself into Eagle River out of guilt from killing her own mother. And just when it seems like all is lost and the case has come to a tragic end, who comes to the rescue to assist Phoenix in his time of need? That's right, Godot. Now, this isn't actually all that surprising. Given Godot's history with Dahlia, it's no wonder that he'd want to temporarily form a truce with Phoenix in order to take her down. And sure enough, they do just that. As Phoenix is not only able to reveal that Maya was not the one who stabbed Misty Fay, but that she is the one who channeled Dahlia after the murder in order to protect herself from Dahlia's wrath. Dahlia is thrown into a frenzy, questioning who could have given her such a brilliant idea, which prompts her greatest enemy to finally reveal herself. Mia Fay. Godot is incredibly flustered due to the fact that both his greatest enemy and former girlfriend, both of which are supposed to be dead, are in the same courtroom. And yet all he can muster to say is this.
So it's true. It was you. You're something else.
This marks the second time that Godot has come face to face with Mia Fay since she died. And yet, he has just as much to say to her as he did way back in the Stolen Turnabout. You would think that given their history, he would have so much more to say to her upon seeing her again. And while I'm sure most of his silence can once again be chalked up to the intensity of the situation, his silence still speaks volumes. He simply compliments her and lets her continue. And so it does, as Phoenix and Mia are able to put the final nail in Dahlia's coffin and send her back to the spirit realm from whence she came. But just as the verdict is about to be handed down, Godot finally breaks his silence. Godot points out that while Dahlia may be gone for good, the one who killed Misty Fay on that fateful night is still unknown, and so the trial must continue. Mia initially agrees with this statement, seeming to be fully aware of what Godot is saying. But when Godot states that he's prepared to call his final witness, that being Maya Fay, Mia directly addresses him for the first time since her death. Despite even Mia's concerns, Godot has a plan, and he's not going to let anyone get in the way of it. And this, my friends, is where all of this strange behavior will finally come to fruition. His dark past, his love for Mia Fay, his hatred for Phoenix Wright, his irrational behavior and helpful advice during this trial, everything up until this point has been building up to this, and Godot knows it. This is where every lingering question about this tragic, spiteful man will finally be answered. I'm sure you've noticed at this point, but a pattern has been used to communicate the mystery of Godot's story to the player throughout the entire game. And that's exactly why I feel the need to go over Godot's story from the beginning. Because the build-up to this final challenge is part of the reason his character is so well written. It's important to appreciate how each and every puzzle piece fits in before viewing the completed puzzle. Players are fed small pieces of information that intrigue and engage them, but they never quite tell the whole story, and that's because it's all leading up to this final test that will connect all of the dots. A test for the player, and to that extent, a test for Phoenix himself. Godot has a plan to test the man that he despises in one final battle so that he can prove once and for all that he's a fraud, unworthy of being associated with the woman he admires so much. He was willing to sit in the sidelines and wait during the first half of the trial because he knew that it was merely a prelude to the final act. Mia seems to be aware of this plan, and while she does attempt to question him, he's so set in his own ways that he doesn't intend on letting even her get in the way. This is all finalized by his final exchange with Phoenix before the recess begins.
Hey, Wright, I've got something to say to you, so listen up. What is it? I don't think much of you as a lawyer. It's always the same with you. You somehow manage to just squeak by without even a faint understanding of the case. Some beautiful woman always seems to come dashing in at the last minute to save you. You've got some nerve! But that's not going to happen this time. This time, you're going to have to do this by yourself.
This exchange does an amazing job at setting the stage for the final battle, because Godot's words do hold a lot of truth. The fact of the matter is that throughout the trilogy, a third party usually does come through to save the day during Phoenix's most dire hour. But Godot makes it clear that things are going to be different this time, which is a sentiment that both Iris and Mia, who are both well aware of the truth at this point, agree with wholeheartedly. The game is taking its kid gloves off for both Phoenix and the player, truly making this the final test to show how far both of them have come. And it's more clear than ever that by taking on this final challenge, everything about Godot's character will finally be laid bare. The mystery and intrigue surrounding him throughout the game made him a truly fascinating character for me during my first playthrough, but none of that would matter if he didn't stick the landing at the very end. And now, it's time to analyze this final chapter to see if he was able to do just that. So let's do this. It's taken the entire game, but it's finally time to get to the core of what exactly makes Godot so well written. As the trial begins, it becomes clearer than ever that Maya is in no condition to give testimony after channeling Dahlia for so long. On both a physical and emotional level, she is at an all-time low. And so when the judge asks her to testify, she tries to say that she didn't see anything at all, before she is swiftly interrupted by, you guessed it, Godot.
Straighten up this instant, young lady. Pick your head up and speak clearly. There's always time for crying later.
This further reinforces the fact that whatever truth is lying in wait, Godot is more determined than ever to get to the bottom of it, no matter the cost. I want to bring special attention to that last line. There's always time for crying later. This mirrors his iconic line at the end of Turnabout Beginnings, the only time a lawyer can cry is when it's all over. Showing how in many ways, Godot is the same man that he was when he was a defense attorney, though the context of the situation creates very different connotations this time around. Whereas this line was inspirational back in Turnabout Beginnings, it's much more aggressive and forceful now. Diego Armando followed a code to see things through until the bitter end through his wits and skills. But as Godot, he's gonna get there through bitter rage and sheer determination. And so, Maya begrudgingly testifies. Though unsurprisingly, it's very vague. All that she's able to confirm is that she was struck over the head, was pushed against the stone lantern, and felt blood wash over her before passing out. She's unable to name anybody, claiming that the scene was too dark. After some pressing, it's revealed that Maya screamed for help after being cornered by who the player can only assume is Dahlia Hawthorne. Shortly after, Maya reveals that she was screaming at someone behind Dahlia Hawthorne. To be more specific, a man. Maya immediately regrets divulging this information, but it's far too late now, as Godot reminds her that she can't hide from the truth, and Phoenix, suspecting that this mysterious man is the one who stabbed Dahlia Hawthorne in the back before she could kill Maya, questions how she would have been able to identify him as a man despite the fact that she was surrounded by darkness. Godot objects and states that there's no way for her to have seen anything in the dark, to which Phoenix replies with,
There are some things that you can only see in the dark, Mr. Godot.
silencing him. Maya begs Phoenix to stop, while Godot eggs him on and calls his bluff, leaving it up to the player to identify this mysterious man. And while it doesn't make much sense at this point, there can really only be one possibility. Phoenix requests that all the lights in the courtroom be turned off, and as the courtroom is enveloped in darkness, only 3 red lights shine brightly.
That was a nice bit of deduction, Wright.
Now, this reveal is one of the best in the entire trilogy, because everything leading up to it was so meticulously crafted that most players could have never seen it coming. Yet it makes so much sense when they take a second to think about it. After all, Godot was absent for the first trial because he was busy with something, the importance of which is something you have no hope of ever understanding. Well, when you consider the fact that the bridge connecting the inner temple to Hazakura Temple was burnt to ashes, it quickly becomes all too clear what he was busy with and where he was during that trial. These facts were placed right in front of the player the whole time, yet they were quick to brush them off on account of his reputation of being mysterious. And even still, one has to wonder why he would kill Misty Faye, and why he's so dead set on reaching this truth if it means he'll just be indicted in the end. Remember, it was Godot that has been pushing for this trial to continue no matter the cost, and now the question of why burns hotter than ever. Several questions still remain, yet with the killer successfully identified, the truth feels closer than ever. Despite this quite frankly insane accusation, Godot stands firm, unfazed by it, simply saying,
If you've got a question, ask the witness. That's one of my rules.
And so, with the tension at an all-time high, Maya continues her testimony. She claims that she only thought the mysterious person was a man because she thinks only a man would have been able to clear up all the snow around the stone lantern that was found to be missing from the crime scene. She claims that this person did this in order to protect her and prevent her from being accused of murder. But this theory is flawed, as if this was the case, the killer would have also erased the bloody message found on the stone lantern. If Maya's admittedly strange theory was to be correct, then there's no conceivable way that the killer would have left this obvious message on the stone lantern. Unless, of course, they couldn't see it at all. This is yet another example of seemingly throwaway information becoming relevant in the most genius way possible. Because there's only one man that the player knows to have trouble seeing red on a white background. Even now, with pretty hyper-specific evidence pinning him down, Godot stands confidently, egging Phoenix to go on. It's Maya who attempts to defend him, but Godot swiftly shuts her down, almost as if this is exactly what he wants. Regardless, Maya testifies once more in a poor attempt to defend him. And while the judge is prepared to dismiss it, both Godot and Phoenix confidently move into the cross-examination. At this point in the trial, it becomes clear that Phoenix is filled with more determination than he ever has before. Any and all hesitation has left his body altogether, as he inches closer and closer to the inevitable truth that he is already fully aware of. He just needs to prove it, and no one's gonna stop him from doing just that. This feeling then extends to the player, engaging them so much into what's happening that it can become impossible to stop and think about the details. And so together with Phoenix, they press on. During the cross-examination, Godot shoots himself in the foot by explaining that he saw something that he could have only seen before the murder took place, the clean scroll of Misty Faye. At this point, I can't help but wonder if this small blunder was intentional, but to be honest, there's no real way to tell. Godot claims that he would have had to know about Morgan Fay and Dahlia Hawthorne's plan in order to be there to kill Misty Faye. But Phoenix points out that the envelope containing the plan was opened before it found its way to Pearl Fay, its intended recipient. At this point, the means have been deduced, but the motive remains a complete enigma. Or does it? Godot claims that he would have had no reason to protect Maya Fay, a complete stranger to him, but players knew far before this case even started how untrue that statement really is. As they are already well aware, there is one person connecting Godot to Maya Fay, and that person is, of course, Mia Fay. And alongside this information, Phoenix reveals to the court that Godot's true name is Diego Armando, showing how he knew this information all along. After all, he was shown to be researching Mia's first trial while he was in the hospital, so he must have had a feeling that things would come to this. Godot, overwhelmed with emotion upon hearing Mia's name, makes no effort to fight back against these accusations. Instead, he opts to reflect on what he has long since lost. In the anime, all he can even utter at first is,
Mia Fey, my love.
Godot then goes on to explain how he was moved by Mia's pure, sweet heart. He explains how he did everything he could to help her solve the case where Terry Falls killed himself, before he was invited to meet with Dahlia Hawthorne in the courthouse cafeteria. It's at this point that it's finally revealed that the death that he has been referring to came in the form of a 5-year-long coma. And when his eyes finally opened up to the smell of freshly brewed coffee, Godot woke up to the worst news possible. Mia Fey was dead, and Dahlia Hawthorne had been sentenced to death for her crimes. There's one line in particular that I feel is the true turning point for the player's perspective of Godot. And that line is,
In the end, there wasn't anyone waiting for me when I woke up.
it's at this exact point that the player, who had likely previously condemned Godot for his petty desire for revenge, is honestly at a loss for words. And that's because for the very first time, the player feels Godot's pain. Throughout the entire game, players were led to believe that Godot was petty, spiteful, and irrational. An unabashed jerk trying to get revenge on someone who isn't even to blame for his pain. But this exposition changes things completely. It shifts the player's perspective from one of spite and anger to one of sympathy and sadness. Because of the atmosphere of the situation and the addition of several important details, a completely different picture is painted. It practically forces the player to put themselves in Godot's shoes and genuinely think about the situation he's in, which is something that I encourage you to do right now. If you were forced into a coma for 5 whole years, and when you woke up, no one was there to greet you, everyone and everything you knew was gone, what would you do? Would you feel lost, confused, without a sense of direction, without purpose? Maybe you would wonder why you even bothered opening your eyes at all. Well, in Godot's case, he had 2 reasons left to keep his eyes open. And as he explains those reasons, the bitter taste of truth plays once more, this time taking on a whole new meaning. Rather than represent Godot laying the bitter truth of Mia's death onto Phoenix, the true meaning of the bitter taste of truth is Godot's trouble to accept the truth he woke up to. A truth too horrible for any man to bear, that his love is dead and is never coming back. It represents the questions swarming in his head, plaguing his thoughts and clouding his judgment. Questions like, why? Why did she have to die? Why wasn't I there to save her? Why wasn't he there to save her? Confusion quickly turns into rage, and rage can be all-consuming in the face of sorrow. Godot had to push that rage onto someone, and with Dahlia gone, he pushed it onto Phoenix. Godot reveals that he got the aid of Iris and Misty Fey in order to foil Morgan and Dahlia's plans. Misty Fey was to convince Pearl to stay the night with her in order to prevent her from carrying out Morgan's instructions. But she was forced to channel Dahlia herself when that didn't end up working out. Godot himself was to make sure that Maya Fey was unharmed, while Iris was to take the fall in case of things going south, which is exactly what both of them ended up doing. And that's where the explanation ends. Godot has laid everything out on the table for both Phoenix and the player to see, but he leaves it to them to finish this case once and for all. It's at this point that the player realizes why Godot has been so dead set on leading them to this moment. For the entire game, he has been testing Phoenix's abilities so that he can prove that he is nothing but a fraud. And this is the final test that will end things once and for all. Godot wanted Phoenix to get this far because this will be what determines everything for him. And while his story may be a tragic one, Phoenix still has a job to do, and he's not going to back down no matter what. Maya continues to plead for Phoenix to stop, which is not only because Godot saved her life, but because Mia explained everything about the situation to her while she was recovering in the medical office, showing how Mia knew everything from the start. Phoenix stands firm and tells Maya that his motives don't absolve him of his crime, convincing her to finally agree to testify the whole truth. It's time for the final testimony. Maya testifies about how she saw 3 red lights before being splattered with blood. However, she also testifies that after being attacked, Dahlia struck back at her attacker. where she then heard a horrible scream and saw the 3 red lights go out before she passed out. Phoenix is not only able to deduce that the scream Maya heard was from a man, but that the dagger found at the scene of the crime with unidentified blood on it was the weapon that Dahlia used to slash at Godot. Godot fires back by pointing out that he was the one who brought the dagger to the courtroom in the first place, and that he could have easily wiped his own blood off of it, assuring Phoenix that his blood is not on that dagger. To be completely honest, this could have been a complete and utter bluff because Godot doesn't want Phoenix to take the easy way out, but once again, there's no easy way of knowing. Maya adds to Godot's argument with a much more solid point. If he was slashed at, then his clothes should be ripped. And since he was trapped at the inner temple, he didn't have a chance to change his clothes before the bridge was repaired. With this glaring contradiction putting Phoenix on the ropes, Godot is hasty to claim victory, scolding Phoenix and telling him that if Mia Fey were here, she would have closed the book on this case a long time ago. And while this was meant to taunt and belittle Phoenix once again, it was actually able to give him an idea. An idea to think things through one last time and remember his deceased mentor's words.
The question isn't whether I can prove it or not. The fact is, I have to prove it! That's the only choice I have! I was taught that it's one of the rules of being a lawyer. I can prove it. I'm going to bring your magnificent vengeance to fruition just as you want it.
And it's here that one of, if not the most legendary sequence in the entire series takes place. Remembering his mentor's words, Phoenix stands proud, fully prepared to take down Godot once and for all. And this newfound confidence is represented by the return of the pursuit theme from the very first game, signifying how Phoenix is returning to his roots for this final pursuit. Godot still doesn't believe that he has what it takes and attempts to intimidate him with the unlimited penalty, giving players one and only one chance to get this right. But Phoenix is undeterred. He knows exactly what to do, and if the player has been paying attention up until this point, then they do too. Phoenix reassures himself by saying that he just needs to do what he always does, think outside the box and approach things from a different angle. In the anime, he actually says this verbally, which makes Godot visibly nervous, no doubt because he recognizes this strategy from his late partner. With one final present standing between the player and victory, they are asked to locate where Godot hid his wound. It can seem fairly obvious when viewing things from the outside, but you have to remember that from the music to the unlimited penalty, the stress is really piled onto the player at this point. But if they think long and hard about it, analyze each and every piece of evidence thoroughly, and carefully consider the possibilities, it clicks. It's his face. What's interesting about this particular section is that whether you choose the right option or not, Godot will say the exact same thing, showing just how confident he is that Phoenix can't do it. But when Phoenix does get it right, something different happens after Godot's line. Godot sees Mia's spirit living on through Phoenix. This marks the one and only time that the player gets to see into Godot's thoughts, where they get to see how utterly baffled he is by this revelation. But before he can even process it fully, Phoenix delivers one final point together with his mentor to take down Godot once and for all.
It's beneath your mask! During the fight, the red lights given off by the real killer suddenly disappeared. Seconds later, the killer let out a scream. That's right, your mask went flying off your face! Mr. Godot, would you mind removing your mask? If you have a dagger wound under there somewhere, then I'd say this whole case is solved! Ah!
I could honestly go on about this sequence for hours. But what I don't talk about nearly enough is the exchange that follows the silence that envelops the courtroom. Because this final exchange between Godot, Phoenix, and Maya encapsulates everything that makes Godot the best written Ace Attorney character of all time to me. It takes everything that the entire game has been building up towards and takes the character beyond anything I could ever imagine. Godot breaks the silence by simply telling Phoenix that he saw Mia's spirit in him. before once more explaining how he always held a grudge against him for not only unknowingly assisting Dahlia in poisoning him, but for letting Mia die. For this entire game, Godot has been unable to forgive Phoenix for what he deemed to be irredeemable sins. Furthermore, he couldn't fathom how Phoenix was able to happily live his life despite what happened to his mentor, and he condemned him for it. He pushed all of the blame onto him and turned him into something that he could never forgive. But in that final sequence, Godot finally realized that he was wrong. He was wrong about everything. All this time, he had been trying to create a scapegoat for his own pain, but here, he finally acknowledges where all of his rage stemmed from.
The truth is, the only person I could never find it in my heart to forgive was me.
It goes without saying that Godot cared deeply for Mia, and his time with her in Turnabout Beginnings showed how he felt a personal responsibility towards her. A responsibility so strong that waking up to the news that she left this world while he was in a coma made him feel personally responsible for her death. And the pain of not only having her gone, but knowing that he could have stopped it if he just didn't drink that coffee on that fateful day, is a pain deeper than I could ever imagine. So deep that he was unable to properly cope with her death when the rest of the world had already moved on from it. You have to remember, by this point it's been nearly 3 years since her death, but for Godot, it's fresh news. And so, he desperately searched for a way to repent for what he believed to be his greatest failure. For the entire game, he ran away from the grief within his heart, being so set in his own ways that he outright denied rational thought, even when it was right in front of him. Even when the very woman he believed he was doing this for stared him right in the eyes, he remained dead set on what he believed would make the pain go away, knowing full well that this simply isn't what she would have wanted. This is also exemplified by his plan to save Maya. As Godot himself notes, if he really wanted to save Maya, he could have easily done so without putting her in harm's way. But once again, he never even considered it.
I think I was just trying to salvage what's left of my own broken soul. I was trying to make up for the fact that I couldn't save Mia. Nothing more. That's why I let you walk right into a situation that I knew was dangerous. Forgive me.
This brings us to one of Godot's most defining features, his mask. And that's because it holds several deep meanings when you consider all of this information. Something that I always found interesting about Godot's mask is that it doesn't necessarily do a great job of concealing his identity. Anyone who knew Diego Armando in the past would have easily been able to identify him. But the thing with that is, he knew there was no one left that would have been able to recognize him. He didn't need to try hard to conceal his identity because he knew that to the world, Diego Armando was already gone. With this in mind, it becomes clear that the mask was never meant to alter the world's perception of him, but his perception of the world. Ever since Godot woke up from his coma, he saw the world through this lens, a lens consumed with confusion, anger, and sorrow. To that end, the fact that he can't see red on a white surface because of his mask is incredibly meaningful, because the man who ultimately ended Mia's life was named Red White. And yet Godot, both metaphorically and literally, was unable to see Red White, the one truly responsible for the death of his love. Instead, he looked to others to direct his anger towards. Godot's mask never really succeeded in concealing his true identity, but it did succeed in making him blind to the truth. Godot then thinks back to that fateful night. He reflects on seeing the woman who had taken everything from her, Dahlia Hawthorne, and plunging the blade deep into her back. This line shows how his rational side was never fully gone. He knew all this time that what he was doing was wrong, but in the end, his thirst for vengeance was overwhelming. Stabbing Dahlia Hawthorne was a moment of weakness breaking through his cool and composed personality, mirroring how he crushed his coffee cup following the death of Terry Falls. He notes how in that moment, he likely wasn't interested in saving Maya at all, but instead was consumed by the desire to get back at the demoness who ruined his life. In the end, Godot admits that all this time, he was merely chasing an illusion, a fantasy. And he admits that the one who saved him from his delusion was Phoenix Wright. Because while Godot delved further into his delusions in a desperate attempt to repent for not saving Mia, Phoenix chose to live on for her because that's what she would have wanted. Phoenix not only showed Godot the light out of the darkness, but he was able to remind him what it means to be a defense attorney in the first place. Something that he had long since suppressed in his desperation.
You never ran away from Mia's death. Instead, you picked up where she left off as a true defender of the people. In that one moment, I understood everything.
Another peculiar thing I noticed about Godot is that when his true name is revealed, the name used in his text boxes remains the same. I initially found this odd because names used in text boxes tend to shift immediately after a character's identity is revealed. And from what I can remember, this is the only instance of that not happening. But after thinking about it a little bit harder, I realized that it's because Diego Armando is still lost until he finally realizes the error of his ways. Much like how his mask concealed his own perception of the world, he suppressed his true self until Phoenix was finally able to show him the way. And when he finally realizes where he went wrong and admits to his folly, that's when the text box finally reads Armando. Upon officially revealing his true name, Maya attempts to reassure Diego, telling him that she truly believes that he was trying to save her on that fateful night. Diego thanks her for the sentiment, before blood from his wound begins to bleed from under his mask. Phoenix attempts to point this out to him, but Diego simply laughs, reminding him that in his world, the color red doesn't exist. No, these are his tears. Tears of sorrow? No. Tears of relief. Tears because Diego is finally free. Tears because ever since he woke up from his coma, all he ever wanted was for the pain to stop. And after so much pain and suffering, it's finally all over. And as Diego reminds the player one last time,
the only time a lawyer can cry is when it's all over.
this entire sequence is perfect. From the intense final pursuit, to the resolution of so many character arcs, to the beautiful use of music, it genuinely still leaves me speechless to this day. This was the hardest part of this entire script to write by far, because in many ways, it speaks for itself. So I can only hope that I was able to do it the justice that it so rightfully deserves. After a brief exchange between Phoenix and Iris, Diego Armando enjoys one last cup of coffee with the man that he loathed for so long. The man that finally saved him, and the man that he finally respects enough to address using his real name.
How many cups of darkness have I drank over the years? Even I don't know. I'll tell you though, right now, this one here is the greatest cup I think I've ever had. Don't you think so, Phoenix Wright?
Yeah, I think you're right.
After the trial ends, Phoenix laments not being able to save Diego from his fate. But it's not long before Mia appears for the final time in the series to remind him that he saved Diego in the only way possible. Because ultimately, if there was any other verdict, he never would have been able to heal from the past. By defeating him in court and reminding him what it means to be a defense attorney, Phoenix found the only way to finally give Diego peace. So, why does this all matter? This is all great, but how does it make Godot the best written Ace Attorney character of all time? Well, in order to answer that question, I need to be able to explore another question first. And that question is, what is Ace Attorney all about? And no, the answer is not a bunch of lawyers yelling at each other in court. What I mean by that is, what is the overarching theme that encompasses the entire series? Well, if you ask me, the answer is the ability to move on. It's whether or not you choose to live in the past and let it define you, or move forward towards a brighter future. And I say this because this is a theme that can be seen throughout every Ace Attorney game to date. Don't believe me? Well, let's take a look at the first Ace Attorney game's main prosecutor, Miles Edgeworth. In the first game, Edgeworth is a man whose entire life was defined by one single day, the DL6 incident. It's because of this traumatizing experience that he was mortified of earthquakes, has nightmares of shooting his own dad, and was raised to be the cold, ruthless prosecutor that he is. It's not until he learns the truth of that horrible incident that he's finally able to move past it. Yet even then, he's dragged down by the sins of his past while working under Manfred von Karma. It's not until the end of Justice for All that players finally get to see Edgeworth accepting his past and moving forward to be the best prosecutor he can be. This trait is in no way exclusive to Edgeworth. In fact, Phoenix Wright himself goes through a very similar process. After all, the only reason he became a defense attorney in the first place is to save Edgeworth after he mysteriously disappeared following the DL6 incident. And after Edgeworth once again mysteriously disappears after Rise from the Ashes, Phoenix resents him for it and has a lot of trouble letting it go. By the end of Justice for All, he was able to finally forgive him, which allowed him to become the most legendary defense attorney the world had ever seen during Trials and Tribulations. And then there's Franziska von Karma, a woman so utterly obsessed with holding the admittedly outdated von Karma creed that losing to Phoenix and Edgeworth drives her crazy. Upholding the von Karma name was all she had ever known. So when she fails to do so, she completely breaks down. And it's not until later titles that players really get to see her start to break free from those shackles and start to become her own person. And the list goes on and on and on. This concept of breaking free from the shackles of one's past is something that can be seen time and time again, especially when it comes to the main prosecutors. So much so that I can easily say it's one of the main defining themes of the entire series. The reason I think Godot is the best written Ace Attorney character is because I believe he is the best example of this concept to date. You have a man who quite literally woke up in a world where everyone and everything he ever cared about was gone, and the rest of the world had already moved on without him. He's still living in the past in the most literal way possible. Everyone else had years to heal, learn, and grow from Mia's death. But for Godot, he wasn't given time to do any of that. He was never given the time needed to cope with such devastating news. And so he convinced himself that he would be able to heal himself if he could just save Maya Fey, or if he could just defeat Phoenix Wright in court. He tried to force something that could only ever happen naturally over time, in order to make up for the time that he was never given, knowing deep down all along that it was never going to work. And as Godot said, it's because of his drive that he ended up becoming a prosecutor. He knew that doing so would give him the ability to achieve his goals, yet in the process, he cast aside what Mia would have wanted and only delved further into his own delusion. And this is why I think the theme of moving on is so important in the Ace Attorney series. It's because it's a theme that exists within the very core of defense attorneys and prosecutors. It's a defense attorney's job to fight until the bitter end for their client, stopping at nothing to protect the life of another because they believe in them with all of their heart. And on the opposite side of the spectrum, it's a prosecutor's job to do everything in their power to destroy the life of another, because they truly believe that they are guilty and deserve to pay for their crimes. And this is how the conflict between defense attorneys and prosecutors is formed. It's a clash between protecting and tearing down, living on and vengeance. It's a dynamic that, like the theme of moving on, can be seen throughout the entire series. But I think no two characters showcase it better than Phoenix Wright and Godot. Rather than live on for Mia, Godot chose to try and avenge her. Rather than protect others for her, he chose to tear others down for her. Rather than follow in her footsteps and carry on her legacy, he chose to become a prosecutor and selfishly pursue what he believed would give him peace. Phoenix Wright, as Mia Fey's true successor, chose to live on for her. He chose to protect those that he cares about the most, and he chose to follow in her footsteps as a true defender of the people. And this extreme display of some of Ace Attorney's most prominent themes gives Godot a sense of finality unlike any main prosecutor before or after him. Not only because his story is closely tied to Phoenix Wright himself, but because his weaknesses help to draw out Phoenix's greatest strengths. Godot isn't just Phoenix's toughest challenge yet, but a culmination of everything that he's learned throughout the trilogy combined to create the ultimate adversary. Godot represents the dark path that Phoenix could have taken, And by defeating him, Phoenix was able to become, as Mia put it, as good out there as any defense lawyer could ever hope to be. Godot is the perfect final challenge to close out the trilogy in the most satisfying way possible. And yet at the same time, Godot is so much more than just a simple villain. In fact, I would argue he's just as much of a villain as he is a hero. And that's because it's his words that inspired Mia, Phoenix, and every attorney to ever work at Wright & Co. law offices to never give up no matter the odds. He may have been unable to face Mia's death head on, but that doesn't change the fact that he was one of the most legendary defense attorneys in the series. And it doesn't change the fact that his teachings were some of the most influential ones in the entire franchise. All of this combines to create a character that, in many ways, represents the yin and yang of the Ace Attorney series as a whole, encapsulating what it means to be both a defense attorney and a prosecutor at the same time. He's a representation of what it means to protect those you care about the most, while also being a representation of what it means to seek revenge on another for the sake of justice. Now, I want to make something perfectly clear. Godot is not a perfect character. As I've stated several times throughout this video, he's arrogant, overconfident, mean-spirited, and demeaning. And yet, I think his flaws are what draw me to him so much. I think it's so much harder to give a character noticeable flaws than it is to give them strengths. But those flaws are what make the character in question human. Because at the end of the day, nobody is perfect. We all have aspects of ourselves that we're not proud of. And when we're placed in situations we never could have anticipated, it can be very easy to think irrationally and do things that we know are wrong and end up regretting. And Godot, despite the fact that Trials and Tribulations is not entirely grounded in reality, is one of the most human characters I've ever seen. As I stated at the beginning of this video, the mark of a complex character is not being able to label them with one simple word like good or bad. Instead, a complex character has layers to them. Layers that work in tandem to create something greater than the sum of its parts. Godot isn't just good or bad. He's an excellently written character with a well-defined personality, a tear-jerking story, and the perfect challenge to close the trilogy on. He's the symbolic representation of the series as a whole, and he is, at least in my humble opinion, the best written Ace Attorney character of all time. The worst of times are when lawyers have to force their biggest smiles. This iconic quote has appeared in nearly every mainline Ace Attorney game to date, and that's because in many ways, it has come to define the Ace Attorney series as a whole. It's the perfect representation of Phoenix Wright's determination to never give up no matter how bad things may look. The first form of this quote came in Justice for All during Reunion and Turnabout, where Mia tells Phoenix that a lawyer is someone who smiles no matter how bad it gets. Then again in Farewell My Turnabout, where she tells him, for a lawyer, the worst of times are when you have to force your biggest smiles. From then on, Phoenix never forgot his mentor's words, repeating them through multiple future cases, and even passing them down to both Apollo and Athena so that they too could always remember it. Ever since it was first uttered, it has been a constant source of inspiration, encouragement, and strength for each and every mainline protagonist from beginning to present. But what I find most interesting about this quote is who originally taught it to Mia. Because she didn't come up with it herself, she learned it from the most important person in her life. Can you guess who it is? That's right, it was Diego Armando, trying to support and uplift her when she needed it the most. Although Diego Armando may be gone, never to return in a future Ace Attorney game, the mark that he left on this series is something that has never and will never be forgotten. The lessons he taught have been carried down through every generation of protagonists from the beginning, from Mia all the way down to Athena. Whether you're playing through the Ace Attorney series for the first time or replaying it for the 6th time, try to remember that none of it would have been possible if it wasn't for Diego Armando. If you've made it to the end of the video, thank you so much. Like I said at the beginning, this is the most effort I've put into a video by far, so I sincerely hope you enjoyed. I want to give an extra special thank you to Mornal for voicing all of the voice lines you heard from the Judge, Phoenix Wright, and Godot throughout this video. They are incredibly talented, and I highly recommend that you go check out their channel if you haven't already for some very high quality Ace Attorney voice work and animation. The link to their channel and the links to all the remixes used in this video will all be down in the description down below. If you liked what you saw, then the best way you can show me is by subscribing to the channel. I have so many more things to talk about when it comes to Ace Attorney, and I would love to make more videos like this, but because of how much work they take to make, I need to know there's an audience for them. But for now, that's all from me. Take care of yourselves.